It feels like 2024 is going to be the year of the diorama builds for a lot of people, me included. I'm going to start off with this Hamilton Beach tumbler. It was part of a blender set that we no longer have. And I'm going to turn it into Darth Vader's Bacta Tank. Here I have a 3D printed Darth Vader that came with all the pieces to make a Bacta Tank. I'm only using the Vader. I printed him approximately the scale of a 3 3/4 inch figure, and then I just started painting up flesh tone and his little harness, and then adding some detail to the scars and different little areas here. I'm not sure at this point while I'm painting him how much of this is going to show through the resin. The Bacta Tank is going to be completely flooded with resin, so it's going to be a solid build. It's my first time working with resin, so it's kind of, I have no clue what I'm in for at this point, and I'm just enjoying the painting as I'm going along right here. You can see the little scars and scar tissue that I'm painting onto the legs and his torso. And then all the little ports that they have on them and the buckles I painted with a metallic silver. After he dried, I take a little handheld drill and I'm going to drill out both sides of the mask, and I'm going to add tubes that are going to go up to the top of the Bacta Tank. I prefer using a hand drill when I'm doing this because you can easily, if you're using a power drill, drill too far, drill too hard, and break the resin print. This gives me a lot more control. I just want to drill deep enough that I can glue the two tubes in without having them pull out when I do the next step. To attach the tubes, I'm just adding a drop of super glue. And here you can see I added a little too much. And then I have a little activator spray. Quick little spray of the activator and it's locked in place. So on the second one, instead of putting the glue on his face, I decided to put it on the end of the wire that I'm using for the tube. Added a little extra there. I mean, I wouldn't recommend pulling really hard, but it actually came out pretty decent considering it's just a little dab of super glue holding it in place. Now going back to the tumbler, I want to fill this with resin, but it's going to be upside down, and I want to be able to put a light in the bottom. I take this foam packing and I cut it to fit, and then once I'm comfortable with the placement of it, I'm going to take hot glue and I'm going to try to create a seal on the bottom side of it. Hindsight, hot glue and the foam packing don't work well together. It actually does melt. So this hot glue that you see me doing here, it actually didn't seal as well as I would have hoped. It actually started to pull away from the tumbler as it melted the packing material. So then I decide to take some resin from my 3D printer and I'm going to on the bottom side, this is red resin. I figured that would, when the light shined through, would actually be kind of cool. And I just kind of wash it around to try to get all the edges. And then before it seeps through to the other side, I just take a UV light and I cure it. Probably should have done this in a little thinner of a layer because the resin actually bubbled. It did cure, but it did bubble up and looked like I had a pretty decent seal. So then I moved to what's going to be the Bacta of the Bacta tank, which I'm using this 2-part epoxy. Each of these bottles is 8.5 ounces, so there's 17 ounces total, and that should be enough to completely fill the tumbler with Vader inside. So I do my first pour, which is going to be 3 of these little measuring cups. And then I tape Vader so that he's resting above the bottom, not actually on the bottom. And I set it to side to dry. So the bottom is probably about 3/8 of an inch thick. 12 hours later, it's dried at the touch. It's hard. It's a little tacky, but it's on the inside. And so I decided to do a second pour. And the second pour I do about a 1/2 inch thick. This is not deep pour resin, and that's something to note because with deep pour resin you can pour up to 2 to 4 inches deep without any issues. This resin will actually heat up as it's curing, and this is 24-hour resin or 48-hour resin, 24-hour resin. And so it takes 24 hours for it to cure hard, and you're supposed to wait like 12 hours before doing a second pour if you want. Well, I noticed that between the 2 pours, there's actually a seam that you can see, and I didn't like it. So I looked up what I can do to speed up the pouring time, and it said to do it in a heated area. So I created a hot box that was about 120 degrees, and I poured the entire thing, and it came out really good. Looks nice and clear. I'm really happy. And the outside of the tumbler is warm to the touch, and it's about 112 degrees. But I'm like, it'll cool down, that's fine. So I set it aside and I start working on the light that's going to go on the bottom. I figure I'll get this in place, and I came up with the idea of putting 2 clear LEDs on top as well to light it from the top so it has light from both directions. And then I'm going to set it aside overnight for the epoxy to completely cure. And this is where disaster is about to strike. And no, I'm not talking about the lid not fitting on very well. I come in the next day and you can see that the epoxy shattered on the inside. So I'm not sure if I should have left it in the heat chamber to cure at that temperature, or if that would have still caused this issue. But it completely shattered inside, and it even cracked my Vader. So to try to fix this, the first thing I thought of is, well, I always see them sand epoxy and then pour more epoxy on top and it becomes clear. So I can't get down there and sand. I drilled a couple holes down to where the crack is, and I'm going to just pour epoxy on top and try to get it to go down into the holes. I kind of rushed this, and you'll see I have a lot of air bubbles. Where the original pour, actually, the air bubbles work themselves out. Because this is such a small area, the air bubbles don't work themselves out as well, so you may want to slow down if you have to do something like this rather than rush. I kind of was frustrated, and working with what I have, I took a piece of metal rod and I forced it down as much as possible, and then I put it into my sonic tank I use for cleaning my airbrushes. And if you watch carefully, you can see just as the sonic cleaner is actually vibrating, it's pushing the air up and pulling the resin down in, and it's slowly clearing up in the areas where now that's resin in between instead of an air bubble. After a few minutes, you can see now I just his face is actually obscured. Unfortunately, it's his face, so I know that I have to do some more work, so I'm still holding it against the base of the cleaner, trying to vibrate the air out. I'm not heating it up at that point because that would have caused the resin to possibly kick and cure quicker again, and I didn't want that. So what I did was I let it cure overnight, and this is what I ended up with. And you can see the bubbles in front of him, while upsetting as it is, they actually look like the bubbles are coming out from his breather, which is kind of cool. They also help in stopping or not stopping, but they obscure the cracked part of Vader. So kind of making lemonade out of lemons, I actually was able to save what could have been a completely failed build, and I didn't have to go get more resin and start all over. Here's the two lights coming out the top. I'm going to run them down the back. I just hot glue them in place. I'm taking a piece of EVA foam and I'm going to create a back behind him. That'll help the light a little, and it will also hide the wiring for the lights. I get all the lights all wired up. All three lights, the two on the top and the one on the bottom, are wired to a little coin battery holder that holds 4 2025 batteries, so it's 12 volts. Right here I'm taking some more EVA foam, and I'm only putting it on one side because that's where there's a warning label that's embedded into the plastic, and I didn't want to sand it and actually damage the plastic to a point where I could have not been able to use it. So I'm just blocking it with this EVA foam. I start looking around to find some Greeblees to decorate it up and hide the wiring. There's a 3 3/4 inch IG-88 head there, a piece from an NS9 Starpath unit from Andor, and then I have a couple of tanks from making whipped cream. I'm not going crazy with the Greeblees, just enough that you're not going to see, hopefully you're not going to notice a lot of the flaws, rather it'll look, it's meant to look like it's been around for a while, so that's my MO. And of course, you know, these tanks, they're the tanks that are going to be supplying the oxygen, so I'm kind of wiring them up as if they're actually supplying him. Then finally, I'm going to just take some black craft paint and I'm going to cover up all the Greeblees and make them match the aesthetic of the rest of the tank. And here is the finished diorama. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did I recover well? Or did I just make a catastrophe even worse? Thanks for watching.